So, hi everyone, welcome. This is Andrea Fitzpatrick of the Mamas podcast. Mamas Allied Make America Strong. I've also sort of added a layer to that and started saying Parents Allied because I speak a lot with fathers like Dustin Vance we have on today. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dustin Vance, husband of the owner of Never Miss a Moment Consulting, Anneliese Vance, which we've seen before on our show. Thank you so much for coming on today, Dustin.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Likewise. I think I want to open with this beautiful piece of art I see over your shoulder that looks like it's
Let me see, without giving away too much clutter, let me see if I can do this. Yeah,
yeah.
so it's all Bluey's pictures right there. And that's my daughter's way of, it kept falling off. And so she was looking for something to hang it up there. And all I had on my desk was electrical tape. And so she just made sure it wasn't coming back down. So that is my wall of encouragement here.
Yes, I see. Um, I love the fact that you have that up on your wall and that you let her use electrical tape. And I'm saying that because a lot of parents would be like, oh, I'm gonna put that on the wall, you know? You're like, okay.
Oh, I got no shame in it. I mean, it's my kids and the wall can be painted and I mean, what's it really hurting? So
But what you just said there, I want to take that apart. I can't resist. The wall can be repainted. What you just said is my daughter is more important and her self-esteem is more important than the wall. Which brings me to the whole reason you're on this podcast. You're a papa, you're a dad, right? We want more dad perspectives. What is it, why is it important to be a dad from your perspective? We'll just start there. Why is that important, do you think?
um I don't know how deep you want to go, and I don't know how much time we have. Um, my foundational belief is my personal opinion is from a lot of just sitting in homes and listening to people and
Mm-hmm.
counseling and coaching people, many years of just taking in information. Um, I've come to the conclusion a lot of where society is at, societal standards and the cultural expectations and so on and so forth, and things that are taught, like the degrading of, um, the marriage entity and so on and so forth, is, I honestly truly believe, and this will probably offend some people, and a lot of that will
Don't
probably
worry about
because there's
that. Don't
no
worry about that.
relationship there. Is no, I'm more of a relational type person, and rules without relationship equals rebellion. People would rather teach rules before they give relationship.
Yes.
When the relationship is healthy and in place, then people understand why the rules are there.
Boom.
And so I'm more of from a relational standpoint of just kind of like my thought processes comes from being in a lot of relationships. And so I feel like a lot of society is where it's at because the failure of men, not the failure of women. Um,
Tell me what
if
you mean by that. That's an intriguing thing, especially coming from a gentleman.
um, you know, if you look at like uh a lot of examples out there of like, um if you look at, here's a very dumbed down, and I can dumb down kind of way of looking at it, but if you look at like a lot like the feminists, where like there's a lot of offense and trauma and regret and hurt and pain that's established in that community, a lot of that is stemming from because a man failed to cultivate esteem or add value or raise that person up. Or like, for example, look at like the topic of like a failed marriage. Is they part ways, they do their oath, they say, uh, rich or poor, good or whatever, thick or thin, I'm here with you. But then you get to a point where it just got too hard. And so now you just communicated a message that, you know what, I lied to you. And they failed versus slowing down and just going, what does this person need? Why are they where they're at? Hearing them. I truly believe men's roles are to cultivate people around them. And it's not cultivate people in the way that you feel they should be, but it's cultivating people to what their giftings are. And so I personally feel like, for example, like if a guy and a girl goes on a date, um, you know, nowadays dating is kind of more of an excuse to do other activities. But if a man looked at her and said no, and said, we're not doing that because I respect you, I value you, I want to get to know you as a person, I want to know what makes you tick, I want to know, you on a little bit more of a deeper level versus a physical level. I personally think that changes the value of that individual. But men are like, well, okay, I'll take it because that's what I want. And all that communicates as a message is, so long as they give this, I'm accepted, I'm appreciated, or whatever. I'll dress a certain way to get attention or whatever. Versus if men would just slow down and recognize like there are wrongs that we can correct versus looking for institutes to do the correction, versus if men were looking around us going, hey, I see you and you're important. Um, I was brought up in a house where things were more important than um, the children, so to speak, meaning like if something broke, they got upset because they couldn't buy a second one. And so when it broke, they didn't address the situation that created it. Could have been a complete accident. Emotions were high because a lamp broke or a table got, nicked or a wall got scraped. And so because the emotions were already naturally high, you were corrected and punished, not based off of the context in the scenario. You were punished because of the inconvenience it created, whether it was financial, whether it was time or whatnot. And so one of the things I've always kind of tried to do is like, we could buy another, no big deal. We try not to buy anything that we can't have two of. So that way, when I'm addressing things with our children, I'm not addressing them in the sense of like that TV is more important than them. I want to address them in that scenario, in that situation, based off of what happened, not based off of what caused me to fly off the handle. And I think if dads fully understood their roles in the household more, I honestly truly think we would have a different society. Um, you know, I think men are in a lot of ways pace setters. They're kind of the heading of the family, and I don't mean like in a chauvinistic way, like men are like their lordship or anything like that. I truly believe that women are supposed to partner and be equally yoked with the man, and they're supposed to do this together. And she's there to help complete a vision. And I think it's the man's job to help take the family to that mutual vision, this idea of a family. And because men are bogged down chasing accolades or position and job or a dollar amount or things that they feel that will validate or that or whatever, they don't spend time fully understanding kind of like the way you change society is you change it by being present in the house in
Yes.
that moment. It's not
Yes.
about the politics. It's not about the injustices. It's if you can get the household in a place of peace and unity, then those kids are going to go out because you're probably going to have more kids than there are of you. They're going to have more influences than you are. They're going to be that next generation that they're going to be the standard bearers that
Mhm.
when you are long and gone, they're going to be the ones championing the thought process that was instilled upon them. And so when you start to look at it from that standpoint, like you're literally changing generations by simply understanding and valuing the role that you have as a father. Um, I have
I think,
people, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
No, no, you're
go ahead.
good. Um, yeah, you're good.
I was going to say there's a lot there to take apart. Um, I don't, I agree with you. And I think part of what I'm going to frame up some of what you said a little bit to make it a little easier for some of our consumers. Um, Part of what you're talking about is what we think of as value structures and proper what I'm gonna call in my own bias. I think, and I always say to people, if you think you're not biased, you're incorrect. We all have biases. Our real job is to figure out how is my bias in conversation with your bias so that we can have a productive conversation. So that's my bias, literally. But to that point, um, I believe that what you're talking about is proper placement of value structures and ethical structures, because, and that's why I wanted to open with your art. When I saw the art on the wall, I was like, oh, that's just like, that's touching to me. because you're saying, hey, my daughter's self-esteem and her growth is more important than this thing. This thing is a thing, right? Now, of course, we want our children to be respectful of things. We want them to understand, but we don't want to hurt them in the process. And you just delivered this very eloquent, beautiful speech of all the varied reasons of why things play out the way they play out. But the thing that I'm hearing about that is that you're talking about proper placement of male-female energetics, male-female relationship dynamics, and how those lead the children forward. The one thing that I would add a layer to is I don't think that we don't sort of stamp our children. I think we nurture them, and maybe that's the feminine part of me. I think we nurture their, we provide the example of a value structure and then we nurture it. Does that make sense? Because, and that's me quibbling with a word, by the way. That's me totally quibbling with the word instill, because boy, I grew up in a household that was like, instill those value systems, right? And I'm tapping my desk.
Right.
And for a child, it's like, I don't think you meant it that way, by the way. I think you're saying that when we lead by example and being in proper relationship with each other first, then our children see that, and then our children bring that into the broader society, and that's how we create societal change. And correct me if I'm wrong anywhere in my summation of that.
Yeah, I would probably take it a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily like, I hear what you're saying on like the value structure, and I don't disagree with that. I would say I take it maybe a little bit farther, and I'm far from a perfect example in this. Like I fail regularly.
That's how you're
Believe it or
learning.
not, I mean, there like just a couple days ago, I had to kneel down by Lilybeth's bed before bedtime, and I had to ask for forgiveness, and I had to explain to her my role as her daddy, like I'm her friend, but I'm her daddy and I have responsibilities, and so I have to wear multiple different hats,
Yeah.
and I have to be able to switch them on and off, and I have to fill those roles, and so I had lost my cool a little bit, and I could tell that she was a little sensitive to it, and she distanced herself from me, and um, I had to go in there, and it wasn't like I had to, as in like I was scolded. It was more of I didn't. The distance between her and I got so great that I was like, I don't ever want her to feel like she needs to hide from me.
Boom.
And
Yeah.
so I needed to go in there and I needed to kneel down to her and I had to ask her for forgiveness. And, there's some things that she did, and then she asked me for forgiveness. We had a good hug and we're all good again. But my point is, it's not necessarily the values, even though it does fall in that value, but my goal is to establish a character. So sometimes I have conversations with people, and they throw the word love around all the time. I love this, I love that,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. I've been around those.
There's a societal cliche phrase that people like to use is I love that to death, or I love that person to death, or that just whatever. And but when you really look at it, and if you look at the character of love, um, that's not what love does.
Correct.
The character of love actually brings things to life. It empowers, it strengthens, it establishes, it creates peace and joy and unity. So when people are throwing around a word like love, and then they're tying it to death, and then they wonder why there's chaos in their life, it's because they're literally acting out their idea of what love is. But whenever I found love properly applied, there should always be a restoring effect that should
Yes.
happen there. And so my heart is for my family, my children, and then anybody who's in a relationship with me, is that they don't necessarily see the value of me, but they see the character of love. Um, and that's what I want to point people to, because if we have the character of love established properly in society, then that changes. And we are going to be an example either for good or for bad. One way or another, we're an example, and we'll be held to that. And so I don't want people to see me as me. I want people to see me for that character, that integrity, that a lot of society thinks love is an emotion. So if you tie love to an emotion, then You could be driving down the street and, one moment you're singing along, you're having an awesome, moment, you're happy, you're on a high, and then all of a sudden somebody cuts you off, minivan, all that stuff, and you're mad and you flip in 5 seconds, you're flicking them off, you're road rage, you're looking at each other, cursing each other out. So you went within 5 seconds from this happy go, whatever, and this next moment, you're like, I'm gonna wreck your life. And then you pull up next to them as you're flipping a finger, you see that there's 3 children in the car, and you're like, oh my gosh, now you have guilt, shame, and regret and all this other stuff. And so now you're berating yourself. So if the character of love is really more of an emotion, then no wonder why relationships are constantly ebbing and flowing, because it's based off of how you feel in that moment, versus the character of love is something that is constant, never changing, and ongoing. And it's something that is kind of a true north, so to speak. And so what I want to do with my children is I want them to know that that when they go out there in the world, that if they operate in a character, then they will be a positive example no matter where they go. Um, I don't aim for perfection. I want to teach our children to aim for excellence, because perfection is not obtainable, but excellence can be applied no matter where you're at it in your life. And so that's what I want people around me to see, is whenever I go into their lives is, I want them to see that I love them, and that I've made an active decision to love them, and that, yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but I'm going to choose not to see them. Um, because I want that person to feel free. And if you really look at leadership, and because as a parent, that's my role, is to lead the family in partnership with my wife, is that I'm growing my influence in my children's life. That's what leadership is. If you boil it down, is you're growing your leadership, you're growing your influence. And the more influence that I have, the more likely they're willing to listen to what I have to say. But if I'm constantly taken away from my children, I'm correcting them because I feel like that's my role. I have to correct them and fix everything and all this other stuff. Then I'm taken away from it, and I'm watering down my ability to positively influence them in a direction and what they're created for, their giftings, and what they're meant to go out there in the world to do, not what I feel like they should do. And that's my job. And it's hard as a parent, because like there's things that I would love for my children to do that are things or passions of mine, but if they don't gravitate to them, that's perfectly okay.
Um,
I Go ahead.
do you think it's common, your perspective? Like, uh, is that a common thing that you see in fathers, your perspective? Or do you think it's more of a challenge?
Um, I would say it's a mixed bag. So um, we have from a lot of studying, we have a natural way of trying to change things to look more like us. It's kind of a
Mhm.
natural tendency um, to step back and say it's not about what I want. It's more about how can I cultivate you. It changes from a message of I'm more important and this is how you should be, versus going, I'm going to table my want, to going, how can I tie this to you? And how can I take you to where you want to go in a productive, healthy way? So, I find a lot of upbringing comes into play from sitting down with a lot of people. You don't know what kind of traumas have happened in that person's life. Um, and you don't know, something that happened when they're 6 or 7. Um, and you get 20 years down the road, and they've cultivated and created behavioral habits that's around this trauma. But then without understanding that person's relationship and their upbringing of why they do what they do and what they do, and then you come into their life and you start to put rules on them and go, don't do this, don't do that, without understanding their behavior stems from this, then you're just going to push those people away, because they're going to go, well, they just sound like everybody else in my life, because this trauma, this memory that comes forward in their life when they're in scenarios, and they're like, their brain goes, I must make this true. Um, so it's not as, so when you get these people who come in and they have relationships and they have kids, and
Mhm.
they go, like, for example, like, I'm never going to repeat what my dad did, or I'm never going to repeat what my mom did.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard people talk that way too.
So
Yeah.
I have found a lot of people, when they have that mentality, they fall trapped to, they repeat it.
Yes, absolutely. Or the opposite of it.
So, but when you have a proper character in place, when you have a character of love in place, so in a book that I read, part of love, a character of love or an aspect of love is doesn't suffer past wrongs. So a mistake that I made a lot in my marriage, probably for the first 10 to 12 years, was my wife and I would fight tooth and nail. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was frustrated, livid. I was driving on my way to Columbus. I was hot and I was against the ropes. And I was like, man, I need answers. Like, why does this keep happening? It doesn't matter what I change. Like, we keep defaulting to this. And I had a quiet voice go, "What is love?" And so I started studying out what love was, and I started looking into. Literally, it was like a conversation like you and I were having. Like, I was in the car and driving towards Columbus, and I was like, I don't know. So I started looking into it, and then the voice came back to me and said, if I can't define it, then how do I know if I'm operating in it?
Oh, yes.
And so I was like, well, maybe I should define it. So I started looking for a true definition of what love was. Well, an aspect of love is you don't suffer past wrongs. Well, what I found was the reason why my wife and I were butting heads is that when the conversation got hard and it got competitive, and when it became winner versus loser scenario,
Hmm.
I happened to go into my laundry list of offenses and I would go, remember, you did this. And I remind her of all the stuff that she did wrong.
Hmm.
And then it created the problem. When I started to stop looking at past offenses and I started looking at her for who she is now and what it is that she could be, then it allowed her to move past triggers and our conversations and our relationship overnight changed because I wasn't reminding her that she was a convict. I was reminding her that she was cherished and that she was loved and that I was going to be patient with her. And by changing that, I literally radically changed my marriage. And it
Yes.
wasn't me trying to change my wife, it was me. I had to let go of things that gave me a false sense of power and authority over that individual. Because if they did wrong, that I could remind them of that. And then they had to be in submission to me versus going, you know what? I recognize, there's a history here, but I believe you're better than this. And I believe we can work through this. And I'm not going to remind you, something from 6 years ago, because you know what? It doesn't matter right now. And in the character of love, that's a choice. That's a decision. That's not a feeling. That's something that could be modeled and walked in every day. And I found that when I apply that mentality, not only to my wife, to my other relationships, I found those relationships actually started to flourish and grow too, because they started to feel safe around me because now I'm not interacting with them and I'm keeping tabs, but I'm interacting with them and I see them that, they're imperfect people and I don't need to remind them of that. But I can start now coming in beside them and I could start growing, working with them to what it is that they could be to their strengths. And I think that's the role of a father. And I don't think it's taught because we set out to go do our thing, but we don't have anything. We're not accountable to something that never changes, meaning, a true north. Like if
Hmm.
something has to be a constant in our life so that whenever we're off course, we can calibrate back to. And
Yep.
if we don't have that established, then we could be 100 miles off from our target and we wonder why, what's going on. But by having something that is constant, then we always have something to kind of go back on. "Oh, I made a mistake. I need to correct that." Um, and so to answer that question, it's kind of a long-winded answer to that, but to answer that, I find that in people's pursuit to be the best that they can be, I think they lose sight of the purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and what I mean by that is I had a coach in my life. He said, Dustin, sometimes he said the purpose never changes, but sometimes the plan does.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Marrying my wife, the purpose was to go through life and be married and equally yoked and all that other jazz. The purpose was that, but many times through our marriage, it has changed. And my purpose in my children's life, since my daughter's been alive, going on almost 4 years now, um, the plans changed multiple times every day, but the purpose still has it. And so um, I sometimes have to kind of break it down. And, a mentality is like a harmless mentality is like, am I raising adults or am I raising children?
Hmm.
If I'm raising children, then they don't need my help because they already know how to be a child. But if I'm raising adults, then I need it. And so there's a role and a responsibility to that. And so then that goes, all right, so if I'm raising adults, then what am I raising them to? What is it that I'm trying to establish in their life? And again, if you get the character right, then the rest of it falls in suit, because
Yes.
everything stems from a character, everything stems from a belief system. And if you get that right and in place, then your kids feel confident and empowered to go out there and do what they need to do because the home life is safe. Nobody
Yes.
nobody wants to go out there in the world and slay a dragon and then come home and slay three. I
It
believe.
makes it, yeah,
Go
it
ahead.
makes it doubly hard. I think one of the things that I am very appreciative of hearing you speak into is not just the role of a father as you see it and its importance, that leadership position that he takes, but how important it is for the home space to be safe for our children. And how you're not saying it explicitly, but part of what I'm hearing and what you're sharing is being that model for our children, right? So how they see us work things out or how they see us treat each other is their model, their first model of interaction and relationship, right? And I hear you talking about that, and I can see it even in your vocal tone when you speak of your daughter, right? I mean, I can just hear, I can hear love, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm curious what brought you to all these realizations, because I begin to understand speaking with you why Anneliese speaks so highly of you, because she does. The woman is over the moon about you. You should know that, and she has so much respect for you. Um, and you probably already know that, but she really, really is. And I'm like, okay, so what am I opening a box to on this podcast today? But I begin to see it in listening to you talk. There's a lot of real solid wisdom there. And I'm just wondering, was that something that you got from your parents, or is that something you kind of had to earn the hard way? How, like, I heard some of it in your story of like defining what love is. You realized that, as a husband, that you had to define what that was. And then once you had that, you were able to, you know, totally change your marriage and the way it was working. But for all the structures that you use, the character that you use, is that something that you had a model for, or have you had to build that? Does that make sense the way I'm framing that?
No, I'm tracking you. I would say it's kind of a multifaceted question. Uh,
Almost always with me. I'm guilty of that.
no, it's like I could really come at this topic from like a lot of different angles. And for the sake of time and stuff like that, I would say a lot of failure. And what I mean that is a lot of failing forward. I don't know if I could be who I am today if my wife didn't give me a lot of grace. If she didn't give me a lot of forgiveness, if she didn't give me a lot of room to grow and make corrections. And there's been times where we've been on the ropes, um, but she knew that deep down that we could get through it, and I did too. And there was a desire for that, and so um, it was a lot of failing forward. And when there's humility in place, then answers are available, and it's just a matter of identifying what it is that you want to accomplish. And oftentimes when there's conflict in our marriage, it's because I'm trying to change my wife, and she never married me so that I could change her, and or she's trying to change me. um, I don't have power or authority over my wife. If she, and I'm going to use a word that can be controversial in society, but if she submits to me, it's not because she submits to me because I am a dictator, or I demand it because of my position, so to speak, in the family, but she submits to me because I've earned it. I've created trust. There's a common mission there that she can get behind and help me complete. um, when the topic of submission starts to wane, it's because I'm acting in a way that's causing her to not feel like she can get behind me or beside me. She doesn't feel like she's on the same page as me. And so whenever we're trying to change each other, we're actually going out of our giftings of authority, because we don't have any right over another man, or another woman. And so that's where lots of conversations come into play. And when I'm failing to communicate a thought, I have to have resources. And, for me, I find, so I'll change it for me real quick too. I find when I work with a lot of people in society, it's so long as it's their truth, then it's okay. But I discovered their truth is tied to how they feel or how they currently believe. And so their truth is always ebbing and flowing. And so it's shaky ground. It's always moving. When you get around them, one moment you thought you know them, the next moment you don't. There's no consistency in that relationship. And they're kind of changing the game up. So long as it benefits them, they don't have to do anything. But when you have a never changing truth in your life, then if that truth never changes, and if something's going off, then that means you changed. And so now you need to go back to what was established in your life and you go, okay, how far am I off? And then by having healthy relationships, and a lot of what I've learned is from failure, but from that failure is I hate losing more than I like winning. And so it caused me to seek out relationships to people who had greater fruit on their tree.
Hmm.
And I sat at their feet and I asked questions and I allowed them to speak in my life. At the end of the day, it was still my decision on how I want to implement what I was hearing. And it was still my decision to, if I wanted that in my family, but I humbled myself to somebody else's opinions and somebody else's view that was farther down the road. And so I didn't give access to everybody. I didn't just turn my brain over to a YouTube video or whatever. I literally, like, there's people out there, like, opinions are all over the place. I literally, I sought out qualified people who had the very thing in their life that I was wanting,
Yep.
and I listened to them, and it was normally not over short periods of time. It was I had to sit at their feet for long times, like years, because I had to understand why they did what they did. Because if I wanted to produce a similar fruit, then I had to adopt, postures and so on and so forth. And so once I started establishing more of a healthy character, then it allowed me to grow forward a little bit better. And so to answer that question is I am who I am because I've had a lot of great influences in my life. I could have been, based off of my background, society wise, I would have been, I'm a statistic. Basically, I'm most likely to be in jail, blah, 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 based off of the numbers and what the papers say. But because I had good people come into my life, and really a handful, not many, it was like 3 or 4 people came into my life and they saw me for what I could be, not based off my history. An example of that would be like when you sit down on a job, you have to tell them your past and then they
Yep.
grade you off your past.
Yep.
So, how can a person ever get away from, if they're trying to change who they are, how can they get away from it if the very thing that you need to do in our society, i.e., say traditionally, the way you're trained up to go get a job, but you're graded off of your past? But it's like, but you have a heart to really change and grow forward. But everybody looks at you, go, well, you're a birder flipper. That's all you're ever going to be. Blah 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 blah. Versus going, okay, I see you now. I see strengths and so on and so forth, and I understand that there's a history there.
Hmm.
But what could you become if you
Right.
had better influences? And so I had a key people come into my life um, that modeled a lot of the things, and none of it was ever convenient, and none of it was ever. Um, I remember a gentleman. He's like a father figure to me. Anneliese and I, we were really at it, and um, it was midnight, and I was livid, and I called him up, and I was like, Don, I think we're done. I was like, and he goes, all right. He had to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. He goes, let's meet up at Steak and Shake in Tri County. And I was like, okay. So I drove and I sat there and I thought it was going to be a let's bash on Elise session because at the time she had developed a reputation of being very controlling and very rigid and so on and so forth. And she's not that way now, but then she really was. She was very hard to interact with, and everybody saw it, everybody knew it. And so I was laying out my argument, and I remember the gentleman, even though I was right, I remember the gentleman leaning across the table and he goes, Dustin, it's your fault. Once I got past the initial reaction of like the fantasy going through my head of dragging them across the table and beating the pulp out of him, I was mad. I was clenching my jaw. I was mad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Here's the guy.
you could see he probably saw the thermometer, the 5 shades of red going up there. And I remember looking at him and I go, I'm like, Don, What do you mean? And I thought it was going to be let's bash on my wife's session, and I thought it was going to be a validation of my feelings, and it was going to
Mhm.
be an agreement where like I could part ways if I wanted to and wash my hands clean of all this. But what he was ultimately trying to communicate to me in his way was that, once I started taking ownership over me, once I
Yes.
started taking responsibility of me, then I was able to start moving the family in the direction that I wanted to go. And that was hard for me to hear.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't that I'm saying that he wasn't saying that I was the cause of it, but what he was saying was that instead of looking at all the shortcomings and everything that she was doing wrong, starting to take ownership of all the stuff that I was also doing to fuel that scenario.
Yep.
And once we sat there till probably at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I remember him looking at me and he's like, Dustin, he goes, you don't make a lot of mistakes, but he was like, you're getting your butt handed to you. And he said some other things, but he was like, you're losing. And that's all I needed to hear. And it wasn't a win. It wasn't a scenario where like I needed to win and beat my wife. It was the end product of what I saw my family to be.
Mhm.
I had gotten off course. And
Yes,
so I needed him to remind me of what my purpose was for that family. Does it make sense?
it does. And I think what you're saying there is really powerful, because you just nailed the heart of what makes every family tick, male or female, though it's different for each of us, is that we do have to own what I humorously call our own BS. We have to own our own stuff before we can ever really see another or be there for them. And one of the things you said, I want to go back to it because I like to push the envelope. Um, but you said society has a problem with this word submissive, right? Submissive. But I loved how you framed that because it's absolutely spot on. When a gentleman is worthy of submission and a woman who knows her worth, she will submit, not because he dictates it, not because he demands it, not because he wants it, but because she loves and trusts him so much, she appreciates his worth so much, she's going to gift it. And when we talk about submission, hold on, I'll tie this together. When we talk about submission, what we're really talking about is the man being able to contain the woman's energy, being able to contain the family's energy, being able to build this perimeter that's safe for the family to grow in. And if we keep looking at who someone used to be or what they used to do, we keep holding them to an identity that's back here. And when you keep holding someone to an identity, they can't actually grow because they have someone telling them who they are all the time. They can't imagine or even reach for who they can be. And these are some of the things. I'm not even close to touching everything you said. You said so much. But those are some of the gems in what you're saying is that when a man properly contains the space for his wife, she can flourish. And when she flourishes, he can give and she can nourish. And this beautiful cycle happens that makes the marriage or the relationship just bloom, right? And that's what you bring to the table into the family situation. That's part of what I'm hearing you say. And I think it's really powerful. And I felt I would be remiss if I let the podcast end without like taking that apart a little bit because you're right. People go submit because they hear, they think of change, they think of things that are detrimental. And when we say containment, even some people will have trouble with that word. But I'm not saying box a woman in. I'm saying when you provide a safe space, a safe parameter, a safe container for her, she will absolutely flourish. And when she flourishes, she nurtures every single thing you are. And so you're the lead, and this becomes this cycle where you both create this huge momentum where your family is just like the growth is exponential. And I don't know all the magic that happened and all the trial that happened to get you to where you are, but I'll say that it's admirable that a man got up in the middle of the night to come meet you to basically tell you, look, dude, it's your fault because that's, I think, in my humble opinion, that's what a real friend does. They show up for you, but they also say, hey, I see that you're stepping out of line here for what you've basically said to me you want to create. A real friend will, as I say, hold our feet to the fire a little bit and say, What are you going to do about this? And that's not always comfortable. And that's why I laugh, because, I have not that experience, but I've definitely had my growth. I didn't become who I am today by, eating ice creams and bonbons all day. I just haven't, it's taken work, hard work. And I always say that. Go ahead.
It's interesting you say that, and to respect your time,
Absolutely.
I'll see if I can kind of, there's a couple thoughts I wanted to tie there. Is I had a gentleman tell me, he said, and I found this to be very, very true. Is he said, freedom at a distance looks like slavery.
Yes.
Slavery at a distance looks like freedom. Most people, when we interact with them, they think they're free, but really they're slave to what they
Oh my
want
God.
now. You
Yep.
know, I find correction never feels good and is never convenient. But
Yep.
the fruit of healthy, safe, productive correction always leads to freedom. More of
Always.
it. And I think when love is established in a relationship, when the character, the identity of love is established in a relationship, then freedom is a byproduct. And
Absolutely.
when that character is removed, then bondage comes into play.
Yep.
And I think if men realized that, like, we're trying to cultivate an environment, because you are a product of your environment. You can take a shark out of
Yes.
the ocean, put it in
Yes.
a fish tank, it'll only grow so big.
Yep.
Well, we are very much that way. And I think one of the first environments is, like, if you get the environment in the home right,
Yep.
then people feel it's like base, home base, we can build out from that. Women are wired to complete. And when women don't know their role, then they start to take control, and they start to, they
When they
come
don't
across,
feel safe. When
they
they don't
don't.
feel safe. Yeah, I was going to say, not just when they don't know, that's definitely there, but also when women don't feel safe, that's when they step into their masculine energy. And I always say safety, I don't just mean physical safety, that's huge, but I'm talking emotional safety. When women don't feel safe, they will step forward.
Right.
But if a man keeps her safe, it's magic.
And it's funny you say that, because I had a gentleman tell me, he was like, what are the four basic human needs? And, I was a goon, and I was like, food, water, shelter, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, no. And he goes, no. He said the four basic human needs is uh, security, acceptance, purpose, and identity. And I have found that to be very true in every relationship I've ever walked in, whether it's for a season, reason, or a lifetime.
Mhm.
Uh, I have found that we're in pursuit of those four things. And when a woman doesn't feel secure, then she's going to go and try to create security
Yes.
in her way. And so, security isn't necessarily the guy being all macho and controlling, but security oftentimes is like, when we have a hard conversation, like, for example, am I reminding her of the wrongs, or am I patient with her? A lot of people misunderstand the word patience. People look at patience as like a suffrage, and to some degree
Oh.
it's true, but
Mhm.
it's not necessarily true. There's an attitude or a posture to patience. And what
Mhm.
I mean by that is, like, I equate it to, like, when I watch my children thinking about Christmas. Patience is kind of like Christmas morning. You know, October, it's coming. And so you're building your list. The kids know they're going to get gifts. They don't know what they're going to get, but, like, they're anticipating Christmas morning, and they can't wait. Every day is like, it's suffrage to them, because they just want Christmas to come. They want to open their gift. They want to enjoy it, all this other stuff. And so, um, you know, they march towards something that they don't have, that is not a reality quite yet in their life, even though the gift has been bought, it's already there, it's been wrapped, blah, blah, blah. They know it's coming, but they don't have ownership of it yet. So it has not manifested in their life yet. And so they're marching towards it. And every day is like a beast of burden, because they're like, I just want to get, like, this gift is going to be amazing. I can't wait to have it. Um, but when you have that same mentality when operating in any relationship, going, I'm not suffering you. It's, I am marching towards Christmas morning in your life. And when the
Mhm.
woman starts to feel that way, when she starts to feel that I can be patient with her, and I know that we're going to grow through this, then that again starts to create an environment. And then, that security is in place, financial security. Some women care about that kind of stuff. And it's not necessarily about the provision, but they just want to know, I've discovered, they just want to know it's going to be okay. They
That's
just,
exactly it.
they just want to know it's going to be okay. So on and so forth. So it's like when a guy starts to understand his role, then he starts to know, then he's able to start to cultivate the people around them in healthy, loving, and forward progression ways. And in that way, you're literally changing society in that little pocket. And
Yes,
it
but
brings
that
out,
little pocket is huge. I'm interrupting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, you're good. And so the last point that I'll say is, but if we don't have a healthy understanding of that kind of stuff, it's like some of the fields that I train in, men come into this environment and they want to be masculine. They want to, they want somebody's body that they can take abuse out on it. And they don't value what that person's giving to them. And so they'll abuse that body for the sake of their learning. And, but they don't realize that this is a dad that has to go to work the next day. They have a family. So if an injury happens, whatever. And, but they come in there selfishly going, I don't care about you. This is about me.
Mhm.
And so then they wonder why people don't want to, work with them, train with them, and all this other stuff. Or they'll come home from work and they sit down and they'll watch a football game or they'll watch a soccer game and they'll get into heated emotional debates over the statistic over a team that will never pay them. They
Yep.
have they have no clout in it. They just want to feel a part of something that's winning because they're not winning in their life. And so they feel like they
Boom.
have to argue certain things.
Yep.
And so they know the statistics of the yardage and the pass completion and all this other stuff. But if you sat them down, it's like, do you know the statistics of your wife? Do you know the statistics of your children? Do you know your personal statistics? Do you know your failures versus your successes? Do you know the strengths and weaknesses? If you had a plan that had a short window that needed to be executed, do you know who needs to be in what position in your family to make that happen? Who has strengths? Who has weaknesses? Do you know your players in your family as well as you know the team that's never going to give you anything back but a false sense of victory that you have no hand in just because you sit in the stands? They're living their best life. You're cheering them on as you're watching humanity go by when your family's going, help us, take us someplace.
Yes.
We want to feel something more. And so I think that's the role of the guy is that kind of pace setter, and every man leads differently,
Yep.
and people need to recognize that. And so I like to know the statistics of my family, and it's important to me because I want to be present, even though there are days that I am tired and I'm worn out and I'm mentally taxed. But it's important that I'm present. And it doesn't mean that there's not days where I look at my wife and I'm just like, I got to zone out. Like, just let me reboot. But at the end of the day, it's purpose over pleasure, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, and I would rather see my family win versus celebrating something else. It's okay to be involved in sports, and it's okay to know the heroes of that industry, but I'm cultivating heroes right now in my house. And that's kind of where my mentality is. And I'm not perfect at it because I make a lot of mistakes. But my family gives me a lot of room uh, to fix it. So I feel very grateful and I feel very blessed for what I've been given. I have an amazing family. I have an amazing wife. Um, and I do believe there's a lot more for us, but um, my heart, my passion is I don't want it to just stop at my family, even though I know a lot of how I think and believe. In theory, it sounds good, but practice, it's hard. Um,
It is, and I'm inspired listening to you, and I have to say that that's not always the case. Um, so
I know you're trying to
d-
probably figure out how to like land a plane
no, no, no.
and end
It's
it.
just give me a moment. Well, it's actually really unusual for someone to give me so much, which is just thank you so much. I feel so privileged with that because you just dropped so many gems in this call. I need to say that. You may not realize that because I can hear in how you speak that you're someone who's very comfortable with tying stories together with your examples and making them concrete, and that makes them really, really accessible to people. I love what you just did here. You need to know that. And I hope people will take the time to like listen to this podcast and take apart what you have to say because you just dropped easily 50 really important gems for family success and for father success. Because one of the things that I'll just use this to tie it up. Anneliese will laugh. I'll use this to tie it up. Um, all the examples you used here on the Mama's podcast today tie so beautifully into how we have a relationship with our significant other. And in that way, what our children can lean into as who they become as a character, right? They get to see you problem solve. They get to see how you treat, your daughter gets to see how you treat her mom. And then she goes, okay, somewhere inside of herself, she internalizes that. And someday when somebody asks her out for a date, she's going to have this unspoken set of criteria that she learned from her parents. And same, same with that young boy of your guys is when he gets a little older and he starts looking, they're going to have internalized these beautiful structures that you two have provided for them that I've heard through your stories today. That's just honestly really beautiful and really inspiring. And I don't know where you're going to take it. I'm really grateful Anneliese nudged you and you came onto the podcast today because you just offered so much for everybody to listen to. And I would say, if you have it on your heart, I'm just going to end it with this because I think this is just because I want to. If you have it on your heart, if you're not already doing something, because I don't know, with this stuff that you just shared today, get on more podcasts or start your own podcast or write a book or start a men's group or something, because we need more voices like yours. We really do. And I just can't overemphasize that because what you said is just spot on, absolutely spot on. And you said it a little bit differently than some people would, which means more people are able to hear it. And so, for what it's worth, thank you so much for being on today to speak with us about parenting, about what it is to be a the husband in the husbandly wife journey, and the family leader. I really appreciate your time with us today. And is there any takeaways you want to offer people before we close, or you kind of did that?
I would I would give like a sense of caution to people who are listening to this because a lot of this is my view and
Yep.
through a lot of studying, and it's easy to take an opinion and create a doctrine out of it
Yep.
without understanding kind of where it comes from, why I talked about it. A lot of the stuff that has led to this line of thought and this line of reasoning, and uh, again, I think it's relationships over rules. And my goal is to offer relationship. I can't be in a relationship with everybody. And so sometimes it's about duplicating, so to speak, leaving my fingerprint, so to speak, on that next person. And they're not going to
Yep.
do it my way. But I think if you're in the pursuit of the right character,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of corrects itself. So,
It it
um,
it does. And to add a layer to what you're saying, I do believe, totally stand by. You dropped a lot of gems here. One of the things we can caveat that with is that when we do listen to things, podcast included, like this one, listen to understand what benefits and helps your journey, right? To our listeners out there.
right,
Um, but listen to understand versus react, like really understand, because a
right,
lot of the things that we explore on the Mama's podcast are in depth, and we may not have a chance to take it all apart within a single podcast for people. So
right.
do your homework.
Because the stories that they're going to hear on this is they're going to hear a truncated story, but the thing they won't know is in that story is the year and a half struggle, the
Right.
6 month struggle. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
The immense
absolutely.
pressure, the immense pressure. They're getting the refined, of this, and so it's easy to take something and kind of run with it without having an understanding of where the thought process was born. And so I would just encourage people as they're listening to just do grocery cart method. Um, just take what you feel like you need at that moment and kind of go from there.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of people, and more me to you, is I've had a lot of people ask me to do podcasts, and I've had people like tell me I'm an amazing dad, and my response to them is I don't know yet. The race isn't over.
Yep.
Um,
I hear you
and
loud and clear.
I don't know what struggles and challenges are going to come down the road. The thing that I do want to avoid is I have learned some things that have been tried and tested that produces really good results. But I will say it this way too. I want to avoid a sense of pride and arrogance. Sometimes people
Yeah.
give me accolades and they give me compliments, and I don't necessarily reflect emotionally back on it the best because I don't want to fluff up my ego, because a lot of the stuff that I've learned, there has been a cost, and there has been a price that was paid. And I don't want to belittle it, and I don't want to sit there and think that I've arrived, because I'm still, you know, I am still forgetting the past and pressing on the mark of the high calling scenario. I'm still in pursuit of being better. And I'm still in pursuit of trying to lead my family. And so um,
I
I'm
think
always I'm cautious in that sense of like, I don't want to be in a pedestal in some people's lives when there should be something else that's better that should be in their life, if that makes sense.
it makes perfect sense. I always say to people, don't put me on a pedestal because I'll fall faster than you can blink. Um, and I really hear what you're saying because I get it too, especially since launching the Mamas podcast. I get the whole, oh, you're such a great mom, and I just try to say thank you, but I honestly don't let it come in too far because just like you're saying, I haven't seen how they are as grown-ups. I haven't
Yeah.
seen how they are as parents. My job isn't done. And so I don't, for myself, I don't allow myself that kudos of like, oh yeah, I'm a great parent. I think I'm a decent parent. I think I'm a growing parent. I do my best. I can say all of those things, but do I mess up just like you? I'm like feeling forward, you know.
Right.
And I think that's a really, really healthy mindset. So I really understand what you're saying and appreciate it. Um, and that's also why I mentioned some kind of group or something, because you talked about bringing it beyond your family and not at all trying to tell you, oh, you should do this or that. And just saying that I hear a powerful male leadership voice on this podcast today. And I do want to gift that back and say, hey, I hear that. That's powerful. You can do something with that, more if you want.
Right. I hear what you're saying.
Thank you so much again, Dustin, for
That was my
coming on
pleasure.
today. I appreciate it. All right, so you guys have it. That's Dustin Vance today, or Dustin the Great in silent letters.
You threw it in there, didn't you?
I
I was
had
wondering
to.
if you're going to throw it in there.
It's Dustin the Great Vance. Yes,
You got to
absolutely.
explain some content to that, or some context to that later,
Oh
because
no, yeah, later we have to. No, leave them wanting more.
right. So when they
All
come
right.
back,
Yeah.
you'll have to do another one that we'll have to explain kind of where that comes from. So.
All right. Thank you again.